have with us the leader of the state Senate on the minority side. He's the minority leader, so not in control of things anymore the way he used to be in various positions when he was running the House. State Senator Dan Blue is with us on the Brad and Britt Podcast. Senator Blue, hi.
Hey, how are you doing? Sounds like Vegas was fun.
It was. It was a lot of fun, and I was thinking you have to know when to hold them and when to fold them.
Write this down.
When to walk away.
Hang on.
And admit that you're a loser at blackjack. So I did, and I'm just fine. We wanted to have you on.
That sounds like a very valuable lesson in life, not just blackjack.
Yes. You know what? I thought of that. I'm the first person to ever think of that. Yeah, it might be a song. It might be a Geico commercial one
Try
day.
that one time.
Yeah. We wanted to have you on today because we're all seemingly in the middle of this story as it changes almost on a daily basis with HB2, which somehow became known very quickly as the bathroom bill, but it was always about way, way more than that. And you're the minority leader. You saw this happening right in front of you like a train wreck that you could not stop. I want you to talk about that whole process over the last few weeks as this materialized literally in the dark of night when the legislature was convened by the governor, and the next day, wham, there it was.
That's exactly right. We learned, as did the rest of the state, I guess, of the plotting and scheming and planning to have a special session to undo the Charlotte Ordinance through the press, and following us learning that, so maybe sometime in early March, or late February, I started inquiring as the Democratic leader of the Senate of the Senate leadership, as well as conversations with the governor's office of what was happening, what were they planning, where was it going, and the constant response that I got was that, man, looks like there's not going to be a special session, but we'll let you know if anything happens. And so once it became obvious that something was in the works, say a week before we had the special session in March, I started calling, or had my staff call the President Pro Tem's office on a frequent basis to find out what was being done, what was being drafted, and what was it looking like, and really what was trying to be achieved. And again, we got no response. On the eve before the special session was called, I heard a news story that one was going to be called, and the next day I got the notice that we were coming into session the following day. Again, we tried to find out what any proposed legislation would look like, what the target of the legislation was, and again, no response. And we found out on the morning of the special session, once the House committee had started considering the bill, what was in it. And that was about 10:15. We immediately started trying to decipher it, interpret it, analyze it, and it became obvious that it was about much more than had been represented to the public, that it was about discrimination writ large, generally, rather than trying to address what people perceive to be the problem with the Charlotte Ordinance. And we got, finally, about 15 minutes before the Senate session, some of our legislative staff, some of the lawyers, to come explain it to the Democratic members, just to make sure that it did what several of us thought that it did. And then we were asked to come to the floor and vote on it. Considering that all of the overtures that we had made to participate, to try to explain what this bill really did, were ignored after we heard the explanation of it on the Senate floor and realized that it wasn't a full-throated explanation, and it didn't really cover all of the aspects of the bill and did not highlight how it was significantly changing North Carolina law. We decided that we couldn't be part of it, of that process, and to ramrod through this discriminatory bill and in good conscience. So the Democrats in the Senate simply did not participate in that part of the process and did not vote for the bill, and went down and tried to explain to the press and anybody else who would listen where we thought the flaws in the bill were. Had no idea when we were having that conversation that the governor had it fast-tracked and was going to sign it within 2 or 3 hours of the time that it passed the Senate.
Senator, you've been in politics for a long, long time, and you know how the game works. So you can tell me if I'm just dead wrong on this, or you can just set me straight on it. My feeling is, my thought is, that this is a nakedly political act by the governor and by the Republicans in the state General Assembly. They are scared to death about Donald Trump being on the top of the ticket or Ted Cruz really being on the top of the ticket, and they know everything down ticket from that is going to be a big problem. So they grabbed for this as a way to fire up their base and get those guys out to the polls in November. Yes or no?
I would agree with that, but I think that the sentiments in favor of what the bill did were present even without considering whether Trump or Cruz or whoever might be at the top of the ticket. It was a continuation of some of the rationale of the Amendment 1, just any opportunity to sort of strike first at the LGBT community, then they would exercise that opportunity. But secondly, an opportunity to basically embrace discrimination writ large, because what this bill does is basically moves the state backwards from a standpoint of preventing and discouraging discrimination. As you probably know by now, it also ended the ability to bring state actions for discrimination in the workplace, that is in employment, based on race, based on gender, based on national origin, based on religion, disability status, a wide range of things that had heretofore been a basis for bringing a tort lawsuit in North Carolina against an employer who was discriminating.
Well, now, hang on one second. The governor wants you to think that that executive order that he issued got rid of that, tied that up in a little bow. We're going to take care of people who are being discriminated against at work.
The governor cannot reverse a legislative action, and I don't think any lawyer would argue that an executive order can trump a specific legislative decree. I know for a fact that it cannot, not in North Carolina, and so the governor can't get rid of it. He could ask the General Assembly to come back and reconsider it and to change the law, but that's the only way that it can change, by legislative action or by a court declaring it unconstitutional, but the governor can't change it.
So in effect, the executive order that he issued and made a big deal out of on Tuesday really didn't do anything.
It didn't do anything in that regard. I think what it did do, it acknowledged that the governor recognizes that his signing this bill created a huge problem, and it's having all kinds of ramifications and implications for the state of North Carolina. This continuous course of businesses not willing to do business in North Carolina is very troublesome and problematic. The jobs lost by PayPal in Charlotte, the jobs lost here in Raleigh with the just yesterday on Deutsche Bank announcing that they were not going to follow through with their plans to add 250 additional jobs here, paying on the average in excess of $85,000 apiece. And so, it's the economic impact that's really causing serious problems in North Carolina, in addition to the point that we seem to be making a statement, or this legislation made a statement, that we welcome discrimination. And I don't think that's the North Carolina that we want. I know it's not the one I want.
We're State Senator Dan Blue here on the Brad and Britt Podcast. Thank you for joining us again, Senator Blue. You're fully aware, I'm sure, of ALEC, A-L-E-C, the American Legislative Exchange Council, and their effect in states all across the country in bringing forth model legislation, wish lists, things like that, whether it has to do with the laws related to gun safety and things of that sort. And it appears that they have their hands in so many things that we don't realize are going on. Can you talk about that? Because you're inside a big state legislature like this, and I don't think everybody knows their effect. They may not be directly associated with this particular piece of legislation, but they're a big deal.
They are a big deal, and the vast majority, I think, of the Republican legislators in North Carolina are affiliated with ALEC. That's the American Legislative Exchange Council. It is funded nationally, and you're absolutely right. They come up with ideas, some of them cockamamie, some of them I'd characterize other ways. But they come up with some very, very off-the-chart ideas, and they shop them nationally to legislators. And a lot of them are sponsored by North Carolina legislators. We've enacted several initiatives that ALEC has recommended to its member legislators.
What are the ones we might recognize?
Well, some of the tax policies they have advocated, and as you said, they not so much as some of their support groups, some of the gun-related legislation, some of the school-related legislation they have sponsored, and you can cover a wide range of issues, and there's usually been an ALEC presence. And again, it's a uniform effort to have these things passed in states across the country.
As of right now, as we speak, do you and the Senate Democrats have a plan, have a bill ready to go to repeal HB2?
We would support the repeal. But again, the leadership in the General Assembly of the House and the Senate is Republican, and the governor is the one person perhaps who can influence them to reconsider what this bill does and to consider the effects that it's having on the state. And so I'm hoping that he takes the lead to address the real issue that's causing all of this pain in North Carolina, and that is the full content of House Bill 2. And that we return to the status quo and have an opportunity to analyze what this bill does. I mean, it's been analyzed pretty extensively now, but and start the debate earnestly so that people can talk about their concerns, and not just have a bill that makes it through the entire legislative process in 9 or 10 hours without an opportunity for input from the citizens of the state, meaningful input, from the businesses of this state, and from those who do business with this state. I think that there is a great need to go back and look at this continuing dwindling of power for local governments. The government that's closest to the people is the best government, and yet this legislation removes it further from the citizens of the various communities to decide critical issues of how they want to spend their taxpayers' money or the kinds of people they want to spend it with, whether they're going to have minimum wages that would exceed the state minimum wage, whether they're going to be able to prohibit discrimination and accommodations in the way they think appropriate within their jurisdictions. And so there's a wide range of things that need to be debated about this bill that were never debated. In fact, were never brought up, and in direct response to some questions that asked about them, some of the sponsors of the bill said, no, it doesn't do that. It really doesn't do anything. It doesn't change the discrimination law of the state. Well, we see that it radically changes it. And so I would hope that the governor, since he's acknowledged that this is a real problem, would provide the leadership and convince the General Assembly leaders in the House and Senate that we need to revisit this, repeal House Bill 2, return some of the luster to North Carolina's reputation, and then let's debate things the way we normally debate them over a session. That is over several weeks or several days, so that there's an opportunity for input.
I think most of us can see that Republicans, conservatives have painted themselves into a corner on this issue. And the last thing they really want to do is repeal it and admit that they were wrong. That's not how we do things in America. We're in Donald Trump America now, where you double down on your mistakes. Do they, or have you discussed with Republicans this very broad idea that those who have been preaching smaller, local control type government, when they're in control, they're going completely in the opposite direction and mandating top-down ideas and taking away local control? Do they not see the hypocrisy? Do they not care? Is it just raw power and tough? You guys had it for 100 years. We got it. We're going to gerrymander. You stick it where the sun don't shine if you don't like it. What's going on? You're there. You talk to these people. You live among them.
tell them all the time and point out that the big H is constantly present. That is hypocrisy. And it's probably raw power just influencing the decisions that they want to make in this regard, that they got better answers. But, the last 3 or 4 years are full of examples where they have decided to take power away from local governments. The Charlotte Airport, the power for the county commissioners and school boards to redistrict themselves in Wake County, Guilford County, and Asheville and Buncombe County, taking away the water control over the water system from the city of Asheville. There are numerous incidences over the last 3 or 4 years where the Republicans have decided that those in Raleigh, being themselves, are better able to find out what local citizens want than the people who were elected locally to represent them. And so, it is hypocrisy at its highest level. And I think that we constantly remind them, but that doesn't seem to bother them too much.
Did Pat McCrory commit political suicide when he signed that bill into law?
I don't know that it's political suicide. As you said, there were some calculations going on as to what the political significance would be. I think that there were some miscalculations, not really appreciating North Carolinians' thirst and desire for fairness and not to be a discriminatory place. I know there were major miscalculations made with respect to the attitudes of major businesses around this country doing business with states or governments that outwardly seem to support discriminatory practices. But you can correct your mistakes. We are also a forgiving state, a forgiving nation. That's part of our ethos. But you have to admit that you were wrong. Go ahead and try to correct the wrong thing that you did and move on. And as you say, if you're just going to double down and refuse to admit that you made a terrible mistake in thinking that folk were going to go along with you when you openly wanted to discriminate against significant portions of the state population, then you will not overcome whatever your fate is when people hold it against you.
Is there just a part of you, though, that likes to see him twist in the wind just a little bit? Just a tiny bit?
My deep love for North Carolina makes me hurt for the citizens of this state. The black eye that we're taking around the country and to some degree around the world. Deutsche Bank is a German corporation, and other international corporations have taken the attitude that North Carolina is not a place that we would like to do business. Well, it's hurting the citizens of North Carolina because we need the high-quality 21st century jobs that these corporations offer. And if we want to get those, we have to realize that discrimination is not part of what most of them subscribe to now.
Well, I would also offer to you, and there's nobody listening to this that doesn't know this, we're just entering the tourism season in North Carolina. That's a $20 billion a year industry. We have exposure on that. Agriculture in North Carolina is a $70 billion a year industry. Do you think that there couldn't be a boycott against North Carolina produce? You're wrong. So Deutsche Bank and PayPal and all these others, they could be the canaries in the coal mine, tip of the iceberg, however you want to put this. We could hurt a lot more if this drags on.
And it will hurt a lot more. This story has been, as you say, the lead story now on the evening news, but it's been front page, the major broadcast story for the last 3 weeks running. I don't know too many local stories that have had the legs that this one has had, and it's going to continue. That's why I think that the governor has acknowledged that it is a real problem. And I'm hoping that somewhere or other he gets advised as to the way that you can fix the problem, and we go ahead and act accordingly.
What's amazing to me is that Indiana had this going on a year ago with the wedding, and they backed down. Yeah. Nikki Haley last week made it very clear that we don't have room for this kind of garbage here in South Carolina. In Georgia, Governor Deal said, no, I'm going to veto. In Tennessee, similar kind of legislation is moving, but the governor ahead of time is already saying, I don't think so. I don't think we need this. Are we living in some kind of isolated island situation where we don't learn from the rest of the other states, the fabulous laboratories of democracy we hear so much about? What's going on here?
And I would point out that all of the states that you've talked about have Republican governors who understand the relationship between commerce, 21st century commerce, and these kinds of policies, and they have stood in the way of them or either vetoed them. You left out the state of South Dakota, the same issue, very Republican state, Republican governor, said that's not the way we're going to do business in the 21st century. And it seems that the leadership in North Carolina is taking great solace in wanting to be a twin to Mississippi. Since it's the only other state that has openly indicated that they are willing to discriminate on a broad basis and tolerate this kind of attitude. So, yeah, we seem to have put our stake in the sand in the mid-1960s, 1970s, and decided that we're going to rush backwards as quickly as we can. These other states seem to have put their stake in the sand in 2016 and decided that they're going to move forward with the 21st century commerce, 21st century businesses, and do the things that make themselves more attractive, that ultimately benefit all of their citizenry.
Do you think, pull out your magic 8-ball, do you think the governor is going to be able to convince the Republicans in the General Assembly to repeal this law?
I don't know. I mean, the obvious mistake is when he controlled 2/3 of the power necessary to stop it from becoming law, he quickly signed it. And now he has, that is his power of veto had he not signed it. Basically, his conversation would have been worth 2/3 of the vote because that's what it would have taken to override him. And so I think he missed that golden opportunity. I don't know what his persuasive powers are, but he certainly needs to give us a great display as to his capabilities in that regard if we're going to move on from this and start talking about the North Carolina that is looking into the 21st century and trying to build an economy that's 21st century oriented, one that does not pride itself on discrimination.
Well, we'll have to ask the most important question now. This goes into the pantheon of where were you? Where were you when you found out that Bruce Springsteen canceled his concert in Greensboro?
Well, I was riding down the road listening to the radio, and I heard it and thought that, the boss has been around and he understands people and, has been on top of the charts for the last 25, 30 plus years. And when he understands the impact that it has on people, this kind of discriminatory policy, I think it's an indication that a lot of other people similarly situated, not just performers, athletes, business people, and everybody knows what these kinds of hurtful legislative acts do to people, and they're not in favor of it, and they're basically walking with their money and saying that we can find other places to do what we do and still be as profitable, and we don't have to engage with you and participate in this discriminatory conduct in North Carolina.
I've got a ticket for my favorite band, Pearl Jam, next week in Raleigh, and they've decided not to cancel, but I would almost guarantee that they're going to make some sort of contribution to Equality NC or one of the LGBT groups, or maybe even Roy Cooper's governor campaign. So he might get a nice big fat check after that gig at PNC next Wednesday.
Well, the question gets to be those, as you say, we're getting into the tourism season. And the question gets to be not only with tourism itself, as you described it, but with the performers as they look prospectively. There are several events that are already booked in North Carolina. The question is whether they will be canceled. But I don't think that there's any real question that similar events will be subject to some scrutiny based on what North Carolina has done with House Bill 2. Future basketball tournaments, future concerts, future the economic activity kinds of things, whether it's the furniture market in High Point or just conventions down in Charlotte or in Raleigh area. Future ones will be directly impacted, and those are the ones that will get away that we don't know got away. as we still wrestle with trying to keep some of those that we've caught, trying to keep conventions from leaving, keep athletic contests that have been scheduled on schedule to occur here. Those are the ways that it will hurt, and if we're going to lead, we ought to lead the state in such a way that we make it conducive for everybody to live out their lives and develop into what God gave them the potential to develop into, and know that having a thriving economy is a significant part of that.
Well, to your point, I said the tourism industry, they've gauged it at about a $21 billion a year industry. Let's say it's not even 10%. Let's say 5% of people cancel. It takes a 5%. That's $1 billion. How many families in North Carolina is that going to hurt?
Well, not only that, if you're running a normal business and you got a 5% profit margin in this economy, you're doing pretty good. So you could be taking away the entire profit margin of many of the companies and businesses that are operating here.
And these people already have razor-thin margins anyway, because the guys on the coast have to worry about hurricanes. There's rain all over the place. And you put this on top of them, man, this could crush some families.
Yeah, but all the children that are going to be protected in bathrooms across this state. Why don't you consider that?
Senator, we're still looking for stories where this is a problem. Do they continue to throw propaganda at you guys that this guy in New Mexico or this guy in Washington State did this to a child? Have they started digging up anything like that for you guys?
No, and again, there's been no citing of specific incidents where transgender or anybody else. I believe you described it adequately when you basically said that there was a much bigger agenda involved here, and that's the agenda that they pursued. And so, no, I haven't heard any believable stories. You as well as everybody else, you don't want men in women's bathrooms, and that's not what we're talking about here. This issue is a lot bigger and a lot different than the one that folk have basically tried to represent. I've tried to describe what the real issues are. The real issues have to do with the state's ability to be competitive in the 21st century, whether we're going to be a society that goes back to allowing racial discrimination, gender discrimination, religious discrimination in the workplace. Those are the signals that were sent out by House Bill 2, and it was a bill that sent the signal that we want to reverse ground and discriminate against people based on sexual orientation.
Could they have gotten away with all the other aspects of this legislation without the lightning rod of the bathroom portion of it, and people wouldn't have got quite as excited about it because it wouldn't have been there, and because nobody in a bar is going to argue with the guy down at the other end of the bar over local control and who can sue in state court and federal court over discrimination.
Let me interrupt you for a moment, because they've done nothing but push the bathroom aspect of this. In fact, it was called the public facility law.
So they blew it. They couldn't they have gotten away with it, considering they exercise raw power in so many other areas with what they really wanted without throwing this in there, so they shot themselves in the foot.
And I tend to think the opposite. They couldn't achieve these other things without having some inflammatory, incendiary issue to hide them behind. And that's why I think that you see the title and all of that associated with the bill. It did all of these other things under the pretext of what it claimed it was going to do. And I don't think that generally you could have had those things by themselves to have much success. I mean, there are clearly a number of people who support them and support them very strongly, but I think the resistance would have arisen had this been what people were talking about in the lead up to the special session. And you got to remember, this was at a special session. You had to have some sense of urgency about doing it. There's nothing urgent about the ability to discriminate after this bill was passed. If it were something that was urgent, they could have dealt with it in the upcoming session in 2 weeks. It was not taking effect on April 1, as they claimed the Charlotte Ordinance was. Mm-hmm. And so they loaded all of this stuff up together to achieve a much more sinister purpose, I think.
Well, that brings us to the point where we can't actually say, when you got to go, you got to go.
This is true.
Senator Blue, thanks for your time today.
Okay, enjoy talking to you.